Hey guys, what's going on? Shaw here, and today in this video we're going to be taking a look at the Protection Paladin. This is a build that cropped up after there was a lot of kind of heated debate about the rework to Paladin. So as we know, Avenger Shield got a pretty substantial rework. Well, not really. They took away Holy Power generation from it, so it has kind of left the community to try to figure out exactly what Blizzard is trying to do or what build they're kind of leaning towards us playing in Dragonflight. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the build that is centered around Dusk and Dawn, which is two separate buffs that we're trying to maintain to provide both a defensive value and an offensive value while in combat. If you guys end up enjoying this video, please leave a like down below and feel free to hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. Let's go. All right, quick little disclaimer before we jump in. Of course, this is beta, so everything is subject to change. There are a few bugs as well with how the kit works. For example, there is a cooldown reduction talent that affects Guardian of Ancient Kings. Right now, it's so bugged that if you have Guardian of Ancient Kings on cooldown, as soon as you cast Avenger Shield, it's going to instantly reset. So it's a little difficult to actually try to test everything, but let's take a look at how this build works. Now, of course, there are some things in the talent tree that are probably a little bit more subjective and open for flexibility per dungeon or per player. But if there's anything that you see that you would recommend me testing out, or you would recommend, replacing or trying, please, of course, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. All right, let's take a look. All right, here's the current build that I'm running for this Dusk and Dawn build. Now, this build is, I will be honest, it is very unique. It's definitely against how we've been playing Paladin for most of Shadowlands and even a little bit of BFA. So it's been a while since we've seen a kind of a playstyle shift on the Paladin, and getting around that playstyle, well, you kind of have to dive in and kind of learn it. And that was kind of my biggest frustration. So if any of you have watched my first impressions video on the Paladin and on the class, the build I was trying to run was identical to how it felt, right, trying to get to where it was in Shadowlands, and obviously that's not how we want it to play, or Blizzard wants it to play, because they removed Holy Power generation from Avenger Shield, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm kind of a changed man now. The build kind of revolves around this idea of maintaining two separate buffs that affect a lot of your toolkit, whether it's like how fastly you're having cooldown recovery on your Holy Power generators, so things like Blessed Hammer, Hammer of the Righteous, depending on what you're talent into, and of course your Judgment. It's also going to be giving you increased armor while you have the buff active. It's going to be reducing the damage you take. It's going to be increasing the damage you take, and it's going to be increasing even furthermore your damage spenders, or your holy power spenders. So things like Solder and the healing on Wog. So the idea is to maintain both of those buffs, and you do that through building up to 5 holy power and then dropping it back down. So let's quickly walk through the build. Let's take a look at the left side of the tree now. Of course, there are some optional takes for utility, but it's a little difficult. You can swap between Bop and Blessing of Sacrifice. You can drop Incandescence. Unfortunately, Incandescence doesn't do the most amount of damage because it's based on the holy power you spend. It has a 5% chance to have your consecration flare up. Now that damage overall in the key is fairly low. Now again, it all comes down to, are the mobs actually in your consecration or not? So there is a consecration build, but again, we're not talking about that here. So you could probably drop Incandescence to pick up some kind of utility towards the top of the tree. So for example, things like Freedom would be a great example. And then after that, you're kind of building down the tree to get to this left corner capstone, which is called Of Dusk and Dawn. All right, let's take a look at exactly what's going on down here. So Blessing of Dusk and Dawn was a legendary / Torghast power that we saw in Shadowlands. It was extremely unique and fun, but it was typically unique and fun in Torghast. So now that it's actually kind of making its way into the playstyle for the Paladin, it has a lot of people skeptical, but I've been really enjoying this playstyle, especially now that I've practiced it and I'm getting more comfortable with the flexing between the two buffs. So let's talk about it. Basically, when you reach 5 holy power, you gain the Blessing of Dawn, and then when you hit 0 holy power, you gain the Blessing of Dusk. And what abilities you have available? So do you have Judgment available? Or do you just have Blessed Hammer? Is there an execute window with Hammer of Wrath? So there's a little bit of flexibility in how you gain and spend your holy power. Once you hit 5 holy power, for 15 seconds, you're going to deal 6% increased damage and healing. And then in Blessing of Dusk, you take 4% reduced damage for 15 seconds. Now, both of these buffs can be up and active at the same exact time. So the idea is you want to be able to get to 5 holy power within 15 seconds, and then you want to drop it as fast as possible. And as soon as you hit, 0 holy power, you want to generate all the way back up to 5 again to try to get that Blessing of Dawn before the buff falls off. So you want to maintain these two buffs. Now, Moving a little bit further down the tree to Seal of Order, while you have the Dawn buff, your Holy Power spending abilities deal 10% increased damage and 10% increased healing. And then while you have Dusk active, your armor is increased by 10% and your Holy Power generating abilities cool down 10% faster. So that's great. That makes it so, your Judgment and your, Hammer of the Righteous / Blessed Hammer, depending on what you're playing, will cool down faster. Therefore, you can generate more Holy Power to get actually back to 5 Holy Powers / combo points, however you want to look at it. So this is really what the beef of the build is centered around, these two buffs that actually kind of are pretty much the same buff. Now for the rest of the tree, there isn't really too much we're taking. We're trying to amp our haste with Seal of Alacrity. We obviously have like increased mastery while we have Avenging Wrath activated or Wings activated. We're taking Sanctified Wrath so it actually lasts longer, and that Judgment actually generates 1 additional Holy Power. This works really well with Holy Power generation in general. And then if we move over to the Spec tree, there isn't really too much going on. Most of the top of the tree is kind of like you have to kind of take to get down. And then we're mostly moving down the center of the tree to grab all the defenses we can. And then we're grabbing some CDR components like Resolute Defender, obviously lowering the cooldown of Ardent Defender and Divine Shield, which is excellent. We also have CDR components like Gift of the Golden Valkyrie, which is currently bugged. It's pretty much instantly resetting Guardian of Ancient Kings, which obviously we don't want. And then we have things like Righteous Protector making its continuation into this patch or in this expansion / challenge tree, which gives us even more cooldown reduction on Guardian of Ancient Kings and Avenging Wrath. So all really great stuff. So most of this is going to be focused on making sure we're able to hit very specific nodes, which creates this feeling where there isn't a lot of creativity in the tree if you're running this build. I mean, there's a Consecration build and there's some other stuff that's going on with Paladin, but I found that this build feels actually the best. But we need Crusader's Judgment because we need the extra Judgment. We also need Judgment to reset based off of procs, and just the additional charge will help us while we're in Wings. And like having to hit this node is very difficult unless you hug this right side of the tree or you like work your way around this way. But some of these talents are fairly underwhelming. So we're going to actually just hug kind of the center of the tree and go all the way down, making sure that we're able to get to Divine Toll. We're also making sure that we're grabbing like Soaring Shield and Bulwark of Righteous Fury, because the idea is that we're using Divine Toll as well as our Avenger Shield. Instead of to generate Holy Power, we're using Avenger Shield as the utility to silence, but we're also using it as a way to not only do a little bit more damage, but also increase our damage on our next Shield of the Righteous. That's going to come in handy with like things of Tears Enforcer, which causes your Avenger Shield to actually make that target radiate fire damage, which is kind of cool. So the idea is that you're going to try to build the 5 Holy Power, and then you're going to use you're going to weave in Avenger Shields if you can, while spending your Holy Power to get down to 0 on Solders. And then you're going to try to, once again, build back up. And you want to maintain both of those buffs, as I've said before. So let's quickly jump over to a dungeon and see how it's going to work. So I think we're going to look at a couple pulls or a couple instances in the dungeon Neltharis, one of my favorite dungeons so far. There's a lot of decently sized trash pull, anywhere between 5 to 7 targets, and all the bosses are really cool and the aesthetic is awesome. But let's take a look. Now we're here in Neltharis sitting at actually 4 Holy Power chaining into a new pull, and because of that, I'm now gonna quickly hit 5 Holy Power so I can get that Dawn buff, so I can start doing some pretty big damage. As you can see here on the meters, I'm up at 30k. Compared to some other tanks, that is very small damage, but it's pretty good for the Paladin, especially not having Divine Toll or Wings active. And then once we hit 5 Holy Power, we're going to actually then try to just drop right back down to get our Blessing of Dusk, which is going to obviously give us, that DR and that faster cooldown recovery on our Holy Power generators, which is super nice. So the idea is you kind of want to chain pull pretty frequently to maintain those buffs. Now, of course, this was a little bit further of a run, so I not only lost all my buffs, but I didn't have any Holy Power going in. So getting threat right off the bat is pretty rough when you have a Shaman doing 70k DPS. The Divine Toll comes out and you shoot back up to about 30k DPS. So the tank really needs, I think, some tuning adjustments for the most part. But the rotation is pretty simple. It's generate Holy Power up to 5, and then dump as fast as you can down to 0 using Solder. If you're maintaining both of those buffs, it's not as important on if you're spending it on Solder or on WoG if you need the group healing, because you're getting that amplification from the buff. But again, you want to try to maintain them, and that's really the key. It all comes down to Holy Power generation and management. Which, again, it's a fun playstyle. It's just so different than what we're used to. Single target's pretty much the same, though. You're just going to pretty much be doing Judgment, and if you have Wings available, you're also going to be casting Hammer of Wrath whenever possible. The single target damage actually seems to be a little bit more on par for other tanks. I just think they need a way to tune the damage in AoE to make it so they can, A, hold threat, but B, have like a more of a rewarding playstyle for actually being able to, you know, spend your holy power frequently. Now, of course, with weak ores and stuff, this might be a little bit easier. I'm playing basically with the raw UI, so it's a little difficult to keep track of all my buffs without whiplashing my neck to look at the upper right-hand corner of the, you know, the screen. So let's quickly talk about the pros and cons of the build. So just kind of a quick recap. So pros about this build, we are seeing high defensive value, because whether we have solder up or whether it falls off, we're playing with talents that actually benefit us with either or. Obviously, having solder up gives us good armor, but once it falls off, we gain block. Avenger Shield is giving us block. Obviously, Consecration is still a fairly powerful way to mitigate damage by staying inside of your Consecration. And we have 4 really solid defensive cooldowns, including I have Tier and Ardent Defender on the shorter cooldown. And then we're seeing things like Sentinel and things like Guardian of Ancient Kings on a longer cooldown, but we're seeing cooldown reduction on all 3 of those 4, except I have Tier. So Ardent Defender, Guardian of Ancient Kings, and Sentinel all have a cooldown reduction component to it in a perfect non-bugged world. The cons about this build is just, it doesn't seem to do a lot of damage, and of course it shifts away from that fast-paced solder spam or Word of Glory spam playstyle that we saw in Shadowlands. So it is definitely difficult to kind of wrap your mind around that and actively try to play against what we're used to. So that was kind of the biggest shift while playing this build. Personally, if you say, like, there's not really any great talents to drop, and that's like kind of a bad part about this tree is like the tree is relatively constrictive, especially once you start getting down towards the bottom. There's a lot of good stuff or decent stuff for mitigation up at towards the top of the tree that once you get to the bottom, you don't have that many choices to go for damage. You can like go into Divine Toll, or you have to drop a lot of CDR to be able to get to like Moment of Glory or things like Bastion of Light. So the flexibility seems a little bit off. I think with proper tuning, with like Blessed Hammer and a little bit more damage up, or a little bit of a damage increase on solder, we actually should be in a good spot. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. If you ended up enjoying this video, my analyst tells me to tell you to like and subscribe. So please do that if you ended up enjoying this video. If you have any suggestions about the build or you have an opinion about it, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to have some discourse and just generally talk about the build. Again, things are totally subject to change. It's still pretty early in beta, but this is kind of where it looks like Blizzard is trying to take it in this direction. So we'll have to see what comes in the next coming weeks. Huge shout out to all my Patreons who support my channel. It means just actually so much to me. So hope you guys are all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Take care.